Hello everyone, today I'm going to be showing you how I make these brown sugar Pop-Tarts. They freeze very well, and the pastry pie dough you can make ahead of time, so that way in the morning it's a lot quicker of a process. So to start off, we are going to add 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour, 2 teaspoons of granulated sugar, and 1 teaspoon of salt into the mixture, and then we're going to whisk that all together. Once those three ingredients are whisked together, then you're going to add 1 cup of unsalted butter. I did end up using salted for this. The recipe also called for chilled. I used more of a room temperature so that way it would mold into the dough easier. I also just used 2 forks. I don't have a pastry cutter. It just kind of shows that you can adapt this recipe if you don't have all the tools. So I'm just going to use a fork and mush it into the dough. You can do this however you like, but if you have it at more of a room temperature, it does go a little bit quicker. This process does take some time, as you'll see. You might have a few clumps, and that's okay, but the main thing is you want to get most of these butter clumps out, and you'll start to see it'll form a dough. I ended up using my hands towards the end once I got most of the clumps out with the fork. Once I feel that I've mushed it up well enough with my hands, I will then take in the whisk and kind of work in those other big clumps that you have. The main thing, again, if there's a few clumps, it's not the end of the world, but you just want to get most of those bigger clumps out. And then once the clumps are out, that is when you're going to add 1/2 cup of very cold water, ice water, if you will. And then I added in parts that way you can slowly incorporate it. And as you're adding this, you'll start to see it start to form that crust. This is going to be more like a pie crust, the texture of it. So once you have all of this mixed in together and you have your dough, you'll see I start working it with my hands until it starts to form into a ball. I think I'm very used to sourdough because as you can see, I'm doing almost like folds with it. That's just what I do. Anytime you're making like a pastry or anything with butter, I feel like when you fold it like this, it almost incorporates the butter and creates better layers. Once the dough is all mixed together, then I'm going to go ahead and prep it for the fridge. This part, what I'm doing, you can skip this part. I put the whole ball in for about 20-30 minutes and then took it out, and that is when I separated it into 2 blocks. But if you wanted to skip the step, I think it's totally unnecessary, and I think I will skip it going forward when we remake this. But you'll see I kind of shape it. So essentially, you could just skip this part. You don't have to put it in the fridge. I was thinking that if I put it in the fridge, it'd be easier to divide and shape later. That wasn't necessarily the case, so I think this step is somewhat unnecessary, but if you wanted to, go ahead, roll it into a ball, and then wrap it up in plastic, and then put it in the fridge for about 30 minutes or so. Now, this is the part where I will go ahead and skip to next time, but you're going to go ahead and take the dough that you had in the fridge, and you're going to separate into 2 evenly pieces. This will form your top and your bottom layer. Something else that I didn't quite do here, but I would think as I did the recipe, I think would be easier in the future, is if you go ahead and spread out the dough more so now into the shape. You'll see when we pull it out, we're going to be forming it into a 9 by 12 rectangle. So if you put it into more of that shape now, it'll be easier when it's not cold to form it. And now you'll go ahead and set in the fridge. I set mine in the fridge overnight, but you can set it in for about an hour to 2 hours just to let that dough kind of harden up really well. Then once you're ready to take it out of the fridge, that's when you're going to go ahead and shape it into the 9 by 12 rectangle. This part is what took the longest for me. I got out a ruler. I have a pastry mat, but I decided I didn't want to get that out, so I just got out a ruler and made sure that it was exactly 9 by 12. And even doing that, some of my corners aren't square, and so in the end, it all tastes the same and it tastes good. But if I was selling these, I'd probably make them more clean cut and not as rough as what I made them here. But regardless, they still taste good, even if the shapes aren't perfect. And you will be making the shape for both of the pieces of dough that we put into the fridge. Once I get to the point where I'm getting ready to cut the pastry dough, that's when I'll go ahead and set out my second ball of dough, and that way it can start to get at room temperature, and it's a little bit easier to form at that point. I'm cutting this into 3" by 4" rectangles. Once you have them cut out, then I'm going to put them on a unbleached parchment paper on a cookie sheet, and I'll go ahead and set these in the fridge while I'm working on shaping out this next layer of dough. And again, you're going to do the same thing here. You're going to put a little bit of flour on so it makes it easier to roll out, and then you're just going to shape it into a 9 by 12 rectangle, and then cut it into 3" by 4" rectangles. Now it's time to make the filling. I use 1/2 cup of light brown sugar, but you could also use 1/2 cup of the dark brown sugar. And then you will also use 2 teaspoons of ground cinnamon and then 1 tablespoon of all-purpose flour. Once you've added all those ingredients together, we're going to mix it up until there's no clumps and it's all evenly combined. Once our filling is made, then we are going to make an egg wash. You will use 1 large egg and then 2 teaspoons of milk and mix those until they're well combined. Now we'll remove the tray from the fridge that we had sitting in there, and you will begin using the egg wash on just the tops of these ones. Once we put the egg wash on these, then we will add the filling on top. I'd say about a heaping teaspoon of filling on each one. You'll see sometimes I go a little bit over. We like a lot of filling in ours, so it really just depends on your preference. I don't measure it out, but I just kind of spread it around. You will want to leave somewhat of a border. I would leave more of a border than what you see here. You'll see later on they kind of overflow a little bit. So if you want to avoid that, I would take them a little bit closer in from the edge. Once the filling is done, then we're gonna egg wash the tops of these. When you egg wash it, you're gonna take the side that you egg wash and flip that on top of the filling. The tops of the pastries will get egg washes on both sides. Then I'm going to seal the edges with a fork. This is not perfect, you can see, but it's just to add like a little bit of sealant to the edges and make it look more like a Pop-Tart. Once all the edges are sealed, then I take a toothpick and poke 6 holes into the tops of each, and then I will do another egg wash on top of those pastries. I put them into the fridge for about 30 minutes or so and preheat the oven to 350 degrees. Once you take the pastries out of the fridge from sitting in there, you're going to do another egg wash, and then they will go into the oven for about 25 to 30 minutes. You'll see they'll get golden brown on the top, and that's when you'll know that they are done. Here's what they look like once they are out of the oven. As you can see, I overfilled, so it's a little bit messy, but they still taste delicious. You will want the Pop-Tarts to completely cool from the oven before you add this glaze on top. The glaze is going to consist of 3/4 cup of confection sugar. You can sift it if you prefer. I did not in this case, but sifting might help it a little bit. And then add 1 tablespoon of milk. You may end up needing more. I added just a little bit more milk at the end because I wanted a thinner consistency than what I had. Then you're going to add 1/2 teaspoon of ground cinnamon and 1/4 teaspoon of vanilla extract. For some reason, I forgot to record spooning them on top of the pastries, but you will go ahead and mix this and then just easily scoop them on top of the pastries. It doesn't have to be neat, they taste delicious. Here is the final result. I hope you enjoyed. Please be sure to follow, like, and subscribe for more videos. Thank you. Have a great day.